welcome to an apple a day with Dr. Amanda. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you bring up a seat and take up a seat and just listen in as we have another episode. And this week we're talking about grief and loss. And so I just hope that if you are in the audience, if you're currently going through this, or you have experience, or you have other people that you know, hopefully you'll be able to get some wisdom tips. Again, this show is purposely helping people to speak using their voice, sharing their stories, and also sharing lessons learned. So again, welcome. Please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. And without further ado, I am delighted to introduce to you my friend Jackie Chovanes, and she is a professor at Shippensburg University, and she has 3 beautiful daughters. And we met when we were both doctoral students at Lehigh University and have since passed on from all of those different adventures, but we have continued to be colleagues and friends, and I'm so excited to hear Jackie's story. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Thanks for coming on. So Jackie, I just wanted to ask, I know, over the years we've talked quite a bit, and just wanted to ask you, how would you define grief?
So I think that for me, the important thing that I've learned about grief through my own experiences is that each person has to define it for themselves, right? Grief is it's something that I think we all think we know what it means, but it means a different thing to every individual. And so definitely, of course, there's that overwhelming sense of sadness and loss and pain, but each person experiences those things in their own way. So I think it really is important when you're talking about grief to realize that your experience of grief is your experience of grief, and that other people may have their own unique perspective on things. Certainly there are commonalities, but may have a completely different set of experiences.
I like that. I like that you said that every person has their own experience, and that you really never know what grief is until you have to go through it. And it may be hard to define until you go through it and try to navigate those feelings. So I think that's a really huge point to point out about that grief and loss. And then Jackie, in terms of grief and loss, how did you grieve a relationship that changed, or that you went through a loss in your lifetime?
Yeah, so the specific experience that I'm thinking of, the most significant experience of grief for me, was the loss of my husband. So he was diagnosed with cancer and fought it for a year, and then eventually, was not successful. And so he passed away. And so for me, it was a profound loss, of course, emotionally, but it also affected every other aspect of my life, including my children. So my experience of grief was one in which I did not feel that I had the luxury all the time of experiencing it necessarily in ways that maybe were what you think of in terms of what someone does when they've experienced that kind of a loss. So I was responsible for 3 little girls. And so for me, my focus was not on my grief. My focus was on supporting my children, and modeling for them was more important to me, or it seemed like what I needed to be doing, more so than just focusing on my own feelings and my own needs. And in some ways, that may have actually been a good thing, because I did not have the luxury of wallowing. I really was forced to find ways to cope, as opposed to allowing myself just to focus on the negative feelings.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing. And I know that was really hard, just going all that through that with your husband and his loss. But that was really what stood out to me, was how you mentioned really having to, helping your kids grieve during that time, but that you thought that it was helpful for you because it didn't get you to that place where you felt like, whoa, I'm going to really get stuck here and not be able to get out of those really hard places.
That's so funny that you would say that, because that's exactly how I conceptualized it to myself. I was like, this is a hole, right? If I allow myself to crawl into this hole, I don't know that I'll be able to crawl back out. And so that's what I was most afraid of, was getting stuck. And so that's very perceptive on your part.
Mm. Well, and just, thinking about that for you now, and I know you said looking back, you think that really helped, that you had to focus off of that, right? Not going into that really hard place, like getting lost in that for your kids. But were there ever times where your kids were grieving, you grieved with them?
Yeah. So it was something that we did together. They were very small. And so they were 9, 7, and 4. And so they were still at the age where, I put them to bed every night. And so, we would cry together. But I certainly did not try to, in any way, limit their expressions of sadness. But what I did do was try to point out or bring up happy memories.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than like not talking about my husband at all because it might bring up feelings of sadness, I made a point of, like, we're making pancakes. Remember, Daddy loved maple syrup. Remember when we went to this fair and we had maple syrup cotton candy and Daddy liked it so much? And like, so that I feel was really beneficial for all of us, just in terms of not letting the kids get the idea that they couldn't talk about their dad because it might make me sad, or one of their sisters sad, or like we tried to be, anyway, open about expressing our feelings, both the sad ones, and also, though I think it was mostly me pushing but there are happy memories too, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that really helps to hear that, you would bring up memories. I think that's also good, for the girls to hear, okay, well, this is what he loved. He loved to do this festival. He loved this maple, different types of maple flavors. But I love that you said you had them either be sad or happy during it, or talk about it, and that they felt safe to know that you're okay with it, that it's okay to, express how we're feeling, even if we're happy, we're crying, right? Because we're excited about a memory, but we're still sad because we'll miss it, but I think that's so healthy. Actually, even in counseling, field, it is so healthy to talk about that. But, sometimes we don't always do that, but actually allowing them and yourself to talk about that, is probably helped in the process. And I'm not sure if even today, I know this has been years past, if you still continue to do that or if it looks different, because I'd be curious to wonder, like, do you still bring it up? Did it change?
Absolutely. Yep, we still do, because that's just a part of our lives, right? That is, he is a part of our family, who's, just because he doesn't happen to be here doesn't mean that we don't still think about him. And so, yeah, I mean, not as much as when they were little, but when something occurs, for sure. And it's not only me, it's the girls too, right? They'll and it's just, like, kind of random things, right? Maybe we'll be driving somewhere and we'll see something that reminds us of something that he enjoyed or that we all did together as a family, or things like that. So, yeah.
Good. And I'm just curious, I know we're just on grief yet, but I know that sometimes grief can be in cycles, so sometimes they say, like, even over time, yes, it may ease up in some ways, but do you agree that sometimes grief can be cyclical, and that, you're doing well, then all of a sudden you bring up a memory and you can't even help it but have some cry?
I mean, there are, every family has you know, their own special things, right? So certain holidays or certain seasons or times of year when you used to do certain things and then you don't do them now because that person is no longer here. So for sure, sometimes there are. And the other thing related to that is that the girls, because they were young, understood their experience of grief at the age that they were when it occurred. But as they move through each new developmental phase, they sort of have to revisit that.
Yeah.
because now they are capable of understanding it on a different,
Mhm.
deeper level. And so when they moved from childhood to adolescence,
Yeah.
there were issues. And when they moved from my two oldest from adolescence to young adulthood, same thing, right? They because their own maturity and intellectual capabilities have developed, they revisit that and then they understand it on a different level. And in some ways that's painful for them, and in some ways it's healing for them.
Yeah, and that's good. I like that you mentioned it could be painful and healing, and especially at that developmental phases, because your daughters obviously were younger, and as they're, getting older, and they all were at different ages. I'm sure your oldest daughter may experience it very differently than your youngest daughter because of more years, more experiences with her dad. And so, even as I talk about it, so I like that you brought that up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, my youngest daughter actually was only 4 when my husband died. And so she feels, so her experience of pain is more related to not so much missing him because she doesn't remember him that well. So her pain revolves more around the fact that she feels guilty because she's jealous of her sisters who have more memories than she does.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle for her because my girls are very, very close.
Mhm.
And so it is something that she feels badly about because she doesn't begrudge them the time that they had with him, but she feels sad that she doesn't have that as well.
That's a good point. I mean, because she's probably grieving what she never had. I mean, that's it's a loss of her dad, in a way that she can't remember, but her sisters can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, again, for those different their ages and what they know. And then even for the girl, for your oldest, it might be interesting because she has those memories, but it might be more painful in some way than your youngest.
A different kind of loss. It's not a different kind. It's qualitatively different, right? Quantitatively, I don't know that you can quantify grief in any way, but it is qualitatively different for the oldest and the youngest.
Mhm. Yeah. And then, so I know we just talked a lot about the ways that it's grief has impacted your family, and everybody differently, like you talked about. But just thinking about you, obviously as a mom, working through that grief with your daughters, which bravely and can be hard to do. But even during it, I know you didn't go in that dark pit, you really wanted to not get into that. But what were some of your hardest feelings during the grief process?
Mostly just the sense of loneliness, right? Your person, the person that was, you just felt like when we got married, right? It was, oh, this is my person, right? I have this person forever. And so missing that, right? So missing just that easy kind of the person who understands you better than you understand yourself, or um, having those kinds of conversations that don't even require a lot of words. So there's that, like on the emotional level, but then there was just also all of the just daily life stuff, right? Like having somebody else to go pick up dog food when you run out of it, or having someone to bounce ideas off of in terms of parenting. Although I will say there are pluses and minuses to everything, right? I also really enjoyed being able to make a choice on my own and not have to run it by anybody,
Mhm.
especially with respect to parenting. Not, I'm, you know, I feel like we parented pretty well together, but as the girls got older, I have very strong feelings about certain things.
Mhm.
And so it was in some ways easier for me to just be able to do what I wanted to do and not have to take someone else's perspective into account. The other thing that is in a weird way, a positive that came out of it is that I feel pretty damn invincible. Like the worst thing that I could ever possibly imagine happened to me. And miraculously. Like, I certainly don't mean to say that this was because of anything other than a constellation of a lot of good luck and some maybe some inner strength that I happen to be blessed with, right? But I did it. And so now I feel like I can do anything. I just feel, and not that it's easy or not that I think everything else is going to be easy, but just looking back on where I was then and where I am now makes me feel pretty confident that I can handle whatever else life decides to throw at me.
Mm. Well, thank you. And, that's really looking at, when you start with that hard feelings of that loneliness, right? And having to deal with, this is someone that knew me, right, so well. And this is like, probably, like you said, one of the hardest losses that you have gone through. And that now, you can go through anything, that resilience that you had, fortunately, during that, but also realizing who you are, realizing, what you have inside to be able to help you get through that. Not playing down that loss, right? Because that obviously impacted your life too incredibly, right? I mean, it changed your life, but that you're able to see it from a perspective saying, yeah, that was really hard. But now I see where I'm at now. I'm really excited and just, I mean, I'm, just even hearing you, like, wow, it's incredible, how you've been able to get to where you are now, despite all of those hard things that happened.
Right. And I mean, I certainly was not always convinced that that would be the case. So I guess my point in even bringing that up is for any other people who are further back in the process, right? It, if I guess my feeling is if I could do it, so can anybody else.
Yeah. And then again, that is good for the audience. Some of you may be in the process where Jackie was, right? You might not even be there. Someone might be in their stages. You might be listening in, and this is where you're at, where you might have had a devastating loss. It could be a relationship where someone's alive yet, or it could be someone that has passed. And, hearing Jackie's words of, I did it, you can do it, and that, you can do it. It's going to be really hard, but we're rooting for you. Yeah. And then Jackie, just thinking about all of this, I know you talked about you and the girls. Did you have support of friends or family during the loss?
So I did. I was very fortunate to have a very close relationship with my in-laws. So my husband's parents were very supportive, and also, my family, my husband's family. And I think because the girls and I, sort of set the tone that we were open to keeping, I don't know, this sounds weird, but like keeping Nick alive in just through conversation and stories and memories, that I think that was very helpful for myself and for the girls, to be able to be surrounded by people who knew and loved him too. So that was very powerful, very empowering for all of us.
That's good. And I'm glad that, again, you were able to have support, family on both sides for the girls, and you making the decision to say, we want to continue to remember. You want to remember our family and keep that alive, and really not forget that part of all of you. And I think that's really amazing. And I know that, again, Jackie, some people out there may not have family. So I'm not sure if you had any other friends that were supportive, or if it was mainly family that helped you get through that.
It was, and the reason why for me, the family part was so important. It was because of how well they knew him as well, right? So they were able to fill in for the girls lots and lots of stories about him when he was younger, before I knew him, and things like that. But in terms of friends, what happened when he passed away was we moved from where we had been living, which was in Maine, where we had some friends, but not to the extent that I would have liked, in terms of being a single parent raising three girls on my own. So we moved back to Pennsylvania to be closer to family. So, but what was helpful for me personally was making friends through the doctoral program with people like you, with people like Emily, right? So that what that meant to me was that my life didn't need to stop at the point at which I experienced that loss. So creating those new relationships was very helpful to me in realizing that of course no one's going to replace Nick, but at the same time I am capable of creating new relationships that are also rewarding, maybe in a different way. Obviously I'm not married to you all, right? But that my emotional life would have to move on differently, but still move on.
Yeah. And that's good. It had family, but you also had friends that you're able to meet, during the doctor program, which I, get, our relationship too, and just seeing how you navigated that, even over the years that I've known you. And so it's really interesting to hear that. But again, how that helped you continue moving forward. And Jackie, there may be people out there, just because I'm thinking of our audience, there may be people out there that don't have good relationships. They don't have a lot of safe relationships with family or even friends. Like, is there anything that you could think of for them that would be safe or some type of support? I'm just thinking sometimes people will go through this and they don't have a lot.
I mean, I think, certainly seeking therapy, having someone who really isn't emotionally invested in you or in your life, other than from a therapeutic care perspective, can be incredibly helpful. I think for me, I didn't go that route. I didn't feel like I needed it. My daughters do. So 2 out of 3 of them have pursued therapy, and they find it incredibly helpful. And so I'm happy for them that they've been able to access that resource, because certainly, having people who know you and love you in your personal life can be very, very rewarding. But sometimes there's a lot to be said for being able to speak to someone who can relate to you without any sense of judgment, and who doesn't have a personal investment in what you like in how you move through your grief, right? Your therapist, it does not affect that person personally if you're still super sad 6 months later, where your sister might be concerned for you, and therefore she's got an agenda that's different. So I would definitely recommend that if that's an option for people, that they pursue that kind of therapy. But then there are lots of other kinds of self-care that you can do. I mean, I was a single mom with 3 little girls. I was not really getting out and being with friends very often. So I made food that I thought was delicious. I drank wine that I thought was delicious with my delicious food, right? I reread books that sustained me. I listened to music. I went on walks. Like taking care of yourself that way, taking a bath. I mean, for everybody, it's different. Whatever those things that you can do for yourself to provide that self-care, I think is incredibly important. If you have a creative outlet, I was knitting like a fiend because it was something that I was able to focus on and sort of put mental energy into creating something and feeling a sense of accomplishment that really literally did take my mind off of my grief. And not that that's going to like magically make it go away, but sometimes that brief respite of not remembering for an hour that you're sad allows you then to go back to the sad feelings and kind of like handle them from a position of strength because you've gotten a little rest. So
Yeah, that's good. And I like to have self-care, so things that you like doing, you said books or taking a walk, going to nature, enjoying wine with food that you like, and doing things that you enjoy doing. And then I like how you said that after you did that, maybe you didn't think about it for an hour, and then you're able to do that from a piece of strength, right? Or being able to have done something that you enjoyed that kind of helped as an emotional outlet so that you could process it differently. And I think that's helpful. Again, we can grieve, and that's important. Some people will look at it, it might be different, but allowing, instead even like taking a bath. So again, doing things that you really enjoy. So I think that's really helpful, and I appreciate you sharing that with the audience. So, really thinking about all of this, Jackie, and I know you said about supports, and you've had a lot of different wisdom tips for the audience. And again, audience, if you're going through this, we care about you, and, we're thinking of you and whatever stages of grief you're in, and we all as humans have faced grief in some form of a way. And so, Jackie, what's one final wisdom tip that you want to leave with the audience?
Um, hmm. So I guess I'll kind of circle back around to where I started, in terms of just honoring your own experience of grief and realizing that the way that you experience grief is unique to you. Your situation, your circumstances, are your own, and you need to own it, and you need to, do the work to get through it, and you will. But also don't feel like you have to match anybody else's expectations for what that's going to look like.
That's good. So again, thank you. Like honoring each person out there, honoring how you go through grief, and that it's not going to look like anybody else, and to give yourself that grace, really to go through that, and to know that you're going to experience it the way that you're only going to experience it. So I think that's great, Jackie. So again, Jackie, thank you so much for being on here today on a, topic that we don't always talk about, but so important to talk about, which is grief, because that's part of our lives. And also for the audience, again, I'm sure you've heard a lot from Jackie, and I may just say that she might be on here again in a different capacity, maybe not on grief, might be education, since that is her background, or something else. But again, audience, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, and tell a friend. We will be on again tomorrow and the rest of the week talking about grief and loss, and having different types of resources or different guests, such as, and again, Jackie did an amazing job on this Tuesday to tell us all about her experiences. So tune on in. I hope you have a great week. Be well. And again, thanks, Jackie, and bye, everybody. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.